This is my 1,000-gallon cloud rainforest vivarium I call Pandora, full of exotic creatures like this new baby croc of ours with quite the appetite, tropical plants, and fungi living together in a giant food web, all within glass. If you think that's cool, I just completed a brand new giant vivarium 2 attached to Pandora, located up on the floor above, and I was just about to start landscaping it into an epic treetop canopy world when a rather unexpected crisis derailed my plans. Oh Lord, my pet fire ants, the Crimson Knights, living on their open concept volcanic island, were having a mating nuptial flight. Flying fire ant queens were everywhere. This was bad, and the start of the craziest story of how I dealt with an outbreak of winged queen fire ants in my home. Welcome to the Ants Canada Ant Channel. Please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon. Welcome to the AC fam. Enjoy. All ant keepers know that pet ant colonies kept indoors typically don't launch these annual mating nuptial flights like their wild counterparts do, because indoors, the ants lack the environmental cues that signal ant colonies in the wild to host these huge mating flights when new queen ants leave the nest to mate and start new colonies of their own. But the problem is, I guess my ant room had since become a tropical haven due to housing my rainforest vivarium Pandora. So the fire ants had taken all the cues and did what they normally would do in the wild, i.e., produce these winged wannabe queens to fly into the air and mate with these males in order to found the next generation of fire ants. But it was in my home, and it only takes one pregnant fire ant queen to find a suitable spot to set up station in my place to amass a terrible, stinging fire ant infestation that would be hard to get rid of, seeing as pesticidal fumigation is obviously not an option I'm willing to pursue. The sight of all the reproductive fire ants swarming at the crater of their volcanic island ant farm, Volcania, and flying everywhere, crawling against the glass of Pandora, trying to get inside, and all over my floor, was what antkeeper nightmares were made of. The tree frogs were crawling up against the glass, attempting to eat the winged fire ants on the outside. Even a juvenile huntsman spider had emerged to attempt feeding on the winged fire ants, whose wing reverberations it could feel through the glass. Don't panic, I'm a professional, but I had to act quickly. First, I needed to remove all areas any new mated queen ants might want to nest in, mainly the potted plants in the room. This was the first thing, because after the queens mate, they seek moist soil in which to burrow to start their own colonies. Next, I realized the fire ants were attracted to the lights. So, I moved my large lamp and fixated it over Volcania so the alates would fly to it and fall back in. Done. I now needed to shut off all lights in the ant room. Oh no, the vivarium. I had plugged up the bridge with foam earlier, but I had to replay the prior events of that night in my head to figure out if there was a window of time in which fire ant queens could have gotten in. It was time for some serious damage assessment, and the only form of damage control I could think of. In a small modest chamber lay the carcasses of 2 royal queens. They were dead weaver ant queens, and I needed to remove them. For huddled together at another spot lay a sacred sorority. 6 weaver ant queens I collected during their nuptial flight were now caring for a promising brood pile. This is their collective pile of eggs, which they lick clean and care for with love. By the end of this video, you will watch these eggs mature and then perform one of the most important and coolest tasks of all weaver ant life. A rare event that even I have never before seen nor documented on film until creating this video. You'll see what I mean later. But if you're new to weaver ants, these super cool ants live in trees where they create hanging leaf nests, marvelously constructed by pulling leaves together, then gluing them in place using silk produced by their larvae. After their nuptial flight, weaver ant queens come together like this, then found their colonies cooperatively. Any queens who didn't end up mating during the flight end up dying, and those that did mate embark on the most dangerous and challenging 3-week journey of their lives. Even when I opened their container, the queens did not budge. They were committed to protecting the brood and sacrificing their lives if the moment came to it. They needed to grow these eggs to maturity, and I didn't know it at the time, but so did I. The future salvation of Pandora and all its inhabitants lay in the success of these queen weaver ants. As I vacuumed up the remaining fire ant elates, I kept replaying the events of that evening through my mind to assess how bad the situation truly was. The plan to lure the majority of the flying fire ants to the big spotlight and fall back onto their island seemed to be working so far. Tonight was pretty much the colony's one and only chance to fly and mate, so any and all elates falling back onto Vulcania would eventually die. Any mated queens would be killed off by the colony and won't be allowed to carry to term, as this species only allows one main queen ant per colony, and their allegiance is to the main original queen. All males and unmated queens would rejoin the colony and live out the rest of their lives to die, having failed at their ultimate life purpose. Now, I wasn't worried about my other ant setups, as any fire ant queens ending up in any of my other open ant farms would immediately be killed and eaten by the resident ants. What I was worried about, however, was Pandora, and whether or not any mated fire ant queens had managed to get in through the glass bridge of the new giant vivarium 2. It was time to investigate. Godzilla, our resident baby croc, was scarfing down his third roach of the night. Man, he was getting so good at hunting in the rainforest. And look at that head! I am totally convinced that the designers of Jurassic Park's Velociraptor were inspired by the look of baby crocodilians. He continued to attempt lunging at prey that scurried all around him, but he was much too full now to move properly, as insect prey scuttled by him when he wasn't ready. But now, with his excellent night vision, our caiman was eyeing something interesting in the distance, just beyond Pandora, through the darkness at the other end of the ant room. Within a glass holding container, an empress was bracing herself for an event that she had long been preparing for. Empress Emeralda, our female marbled mantis, could hardly breathe. She had eaten all the roaches and prey insects she could, and now was about to fulfill her ultimate purpose in life as she proceeded to go into labor. As I looked into our giant vivarium 2, I assessed the damage. So fire ants always fly in the night, immediately after the sun sets. Now, although I plugged up the bridge opening with foam, I only did this much later in the night. It was already evening when the workers who built this vivarium 2 finished off the glass bridge, and completely nighttime the moment the front glass panel was put in place. During this time, the fire ants could have already begun to fly, and a newly mated fire ant queen could have made her way in. In addition to this, when last week's episode aired, some of you commented that you spotted a huntsman spider in one of the shots at the top of the giant vivarium 2. Looking back, I was shocked. There, man, so this meant that one of the young huntsman spiders must have already wandered up the glass bridge and into our giant vivarium 2, which only means at some point, if something could have found its way up, then something could have also possibly gone down. The unknowns of it all filled me with the greatest anxiety. A full-blown fire ant colony in Pandora would completely destroy the ecosystem in our forest and negatively impact all the life within it. But I did see a glimmer of hope in case a fire ant queen did sneak inside. A few days later, I peeked into the holding container of our sorority. Sadly, it looks like another queen had lost her life. I guess she was also unfertilized, and she either died or the other queens killed her. Having an extra mouth to feed that wasn't contributing viable eggs to the brood pile would be a great disadvantage to the survival of the sorority and success of their future colony. So death to this dud queen it was. I removed the dead queen. The egg pile was bigger now. Now let's fast forward through the development of these eggs so we can witness the grand, rarely seen weaver ant event I mentioned earlier. A few days later, the eggs hatched into larvae. See them? The yellow areas within their bodies are what I call ant milk, which is the self-made nutritious soup that the queens have been feeding them, manufactured from liquefied muscle tissue in their thorax, muscles that used to power their wings during their nuptial flight that they no longer need. The stakes were high right now. The last time any of these queens ate was when they left their birth nest over a week ago for their nuptial flight. The queens must continue to fast during this initial colony founding stage as they're 100% dedicated to caring for this brood. No time to go out hunting, and during this period, we'll use up these wing muscle stores to feed the larvae the ant milk until they mature to adulthood. They don't have an unlimited supply of this ant milk, only having just enough to rear this first generation of ants into adulthood. These queens will not get to enjoy a proper meal until their first adult ants bring home their first real food. But before the larvae mature into adult ants, there is something else all weaver ants must do. The most important work of their lives. And you guys will witness it right now. A few days later, my heart leaped into my throat when I spotted this. Several of the larvae were in their final stage of development and were just about to turn into pupae. But before that, they needed to make a valuable contribution. See those fibers? That is not part of the cotton ball in their setup. That is silk. You see, for 2 whole weeks, had these queens been in the wild, they would have had to sit on an open leaf, rearing their brood like they have, all exposed to the elements like rain and wind, as well as predators. But now that the larvae were of the right age, the queens could finally create protection. In all the years I've been ant keeping, I gasped when I saw this for the very first time in my life. One of the queens held a larva in her mandibles, and soon she began to spin a silk wall using the larva as her silk glue gun. Now, I've seen worker weaver ants do this, but this was the first time I've ever witnessed a founding queen to do it. This was such a rare sight, and my heart was full watching the process. She gently dabbed the larva from place to place as her baby knew to release the essential invisible line of silk, which would make up the silk tent that would provide her and the rest of the colony a protective shelter. This was what true ant teamwork was all about, and it didn't matter that she was a queen. In the ant world, all individuals are equals and collaborate. And then suddenly, I noticed another queen picking up a larva. Was she going to start web spinning too? Yup. To help her fellow queen sister, she began to add on to the silk wall using her larva glue gun. Watching these two queens spinning their protective silk wall was one of the most beautiful sights I'd ever seen and made me feel so grateful to be an ant keeper. Once these queens have worker ants, they will never do this again, as this web spinning process will be handled by the workers. This is the only time a queen performs this iconic web spinning ritual. The two sisters continued to spin through the night. This colony will soon have their first set of workers, known as nanitics, by next week, which is perfect timing because I plan on placing this container on one of the plants in the new Canopy Vivarium 2, where the workers will venture out to look for food to bring back to these starving queens and grow their colony to eventually move out of this container and into the leaves of the canopy. My hopes is that the weaver ants will help form an effective defense against the fire ants. You see, weaver ants are one of the few ants in my area that actually eat fire ants. So if a pregnant queen fire ant did manage to slip into Pandora, having an active weaver ant colony in the rainforest will help control fire ant numbers. I couldn't wait for adult weaver ant workers to emerge into our rainforest. I also couldn't wait to place something else into our Canopy Vivarium. Within the Empress's holding chamber, my heart leaped when I spotted this special package. Up on the stick was a little Hershey Kiss-shaped deposit. Our mantis had finally laid an Ootheca, her first egg sac. Yay! Great work, Empress. And guys, check out her deflated abdomen. She must be starved now. Let's fatten her back up. I offered her a roach, which she locked her eyes onto and happily accepted. Why, thank you. She began to devour the roach to replenish the nutrients she had given up to her Ootheca. I wanted to continue feeding her well because female mantises can produce multiple Oothecas before they finally pass away, and producing them requires a lot of energy and nutrients. As I watched her feed, I couldn't help but feel lucky to be able to experience and witness the process of life and how it carries out in unique ways in different species. Every creature, plant, and fungus had its own unique process of beginning its life journey, growth into maturity, reproduction, and eventually death. Other than the fact that it was totally my fault for having them in an open setup, I couldn't be mad at our Crimson Knights, my pet fire ants, for having a nuptial flight. It was part of their life process. Life just finds a way to continue on and have the next generation thrive. It crosses great lengths, travels vast distances to other worlds, and seeks out greener pastures against the greatest of odds to plant its seeds and send down its roots in the lushest of gardens. We'll just have to see if fire ants start appearing in Pandora. But I knew, if they did, we'd have a weaver ant line of defense ready in the canopy, as well as hundreds of hungry baby mantises to wreak havoc on a renegade fire ant colony startup. Which brings me now to the canopy. Our weaver ant colony and the mantis egg sac were ready to finally become part of our rainforest. But before that, I needed to do something first. The time has finally come, AC family, to transform this empty giant Vivarium 2 tank into our new majestic world of trees. It was time to build our canopy vivarium. This was going to be so much fun. Vote in my community tab to affect this story.